Hello, everybody, and welcome to the podcast. My name is Lori Hoover, intuitive guide and psychic medium. Together, let's wake the fuck up. Today's guest has written and edited for nearly every medium over the past 3 decades, from print to television to digital. Her writing has been featured on EckartTolle.com, Modern Loss, as well as in Lion's Roar and Canadian Living. She started the tuna communities and wrote the tuna book to provide compassionate witnessing to those grieving their pets. The book also gives friends and family an opportunity to step forward and offer comfort. So far, nearly 7,000 people worldwide have found comfort from receiving the tuna book, and many more have joined the tuna communities and shared her articles about coping with pet loss. Most companion animals live shorter lifespans than humans. Although we can't change that, we can make the most of the time that we do have with our pets by paying deep and close attention to them. My guest helps people do just that. She lives on Vancouver Island in British Columbia with her current cat, Ariel, where she divides her time between writing, editing nonfiction, and walking in nature. She has had a significant mindfulness practice since 2010 and has been writing about techniques for developing mindfulness and self-awareness since 2014. Tuna takes that experience and shines it through a paw-shaped lens. Please welcome Sarah Chauncey to the show.
Thanks so much, Lori.
Yes, I'm very happy to have you here. And Sarah, as I mentioned when I first reached out to you, I have noticed a significant number of our beloved fur babies transitioning, or they're about to. And that makes me think about the saying that people come into our lives for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. And I have to wonder if it's not maybe even more so with our pet companions, that they're here to teach us something, like unconditional love. What do you think we can learn from our pets?
Oh, man, that's a really great question. There's so many things. Presence is the big one. When I was spending that time writing about mindfulness, I would often wake up in the early morning with a cortisol surge, which is what happens in our bodies as we're waking up. And my brain would interpret it as anxiety. And I would take my hand and I'd place it on my cat Hedda's side. And I'd focus all my attention on the feeling of her fur meeting my palm. And, I could look at her and watch her and learn presence. And I could also learn it by simply being present with her. Dogs have facial expressions, they've been bred to express emotion like humans. So I think with dogs, people kind of relate to them more as human in a way, if that makes sense, like human expressions. Sure. And they, they're not all unconditional love all the time, but they're pretty damn close. And cats are really great witnesses of our lives. I think that is one of the biggest things, is what we all want is to be witnessed, right? To be seen as we are. And the animals in our lives do that. And then to come back to your question, with Hedda, I adopted her when I was 30, and everything about my life looked very, very different than it does now. And I had my mother died when I was very young, and I had twice as much time with Hedda as I had had with my mother. And so I often called her my fur mom. I never really related to the fur baby idea. It was as though she was channeling maternal love for me. And I needed that because I was going through a lot of crap for a long time. And my current cat, Ariel, I go back and forth. She makes me laugh. She tries to get me off my devices, and she makes me laugh, and she gets me to lighten up. And I can really kind of appreciate that because it's like, oh, I'm in a different chapter now. And yeah, I need to remember to laugh.
Absolutely. I agree with that, especially because they have such different personalities. Like I have
Yes.
3 in the house and cats. There's a brother and sister. They're literally from the same litter, but I believe that the female has a different father because cats
Yeah.
can have up to 5 different
Right.
fathers from one litter. She was the only one that was solid black. All the rest of them are these ginormous Maine Coon cats, and
Oh,
she's
wow.
this tiny little black thing. But there's a kitten here now that is a Siamese, and he is just a trip. He just tears through the house and he flies off of my bed. And yeah, he's crazy. He's
They're so
crazy, but
fast.
yes, but he absolutely makes me laugh. He is just like when I'm feeding him in the morning, he literally will try and climb up my nightshirt or whatever. And
Oh. Aw.
he gets so excited at eating time,
Yeah.
but
It's a good thing to learn too. It's like, hey, we get food. Cool. We
yes.
take a lot of stuff for granted.
Yeah, absolutely, we do. I know it's not always the case, but it can be easier sometimes to say goodbye to the humans in our lives. Why is it so hard to get over the loss of a pet?
Mm. I will say that I've experienced a lot of human loss in my life too. I mentioned that my mother died when I was 9 and my father when I was in my 30s. And in between, I was in the first wave of the AIDS epidemic as a researcher, volunteer, and just human being. And I lost many, many friends in that time. And I think animals see us in ways no human really can. They witness us, they accept us. We show them, we show them our ugly cries. We're vulnerable around them in ways we might not even be comfortable being vulnerable around a partner, a human partner. They are simply there and they offer mostly unconditional love as long as there's no harm coming to them. They're not hungry or in pain. They are very loving. And we live in this world where there's so much pressure to be always on. And animals remind us and help us to slow down and to remember to savor life. Or they make us laugh, or sometimes they just remind us to make time for being. And these are all things that, yeah, humans can make us laugh and humans can tell us to slow down and tell us to make time for being. But it's a really visceral, energetic connection with animals in my experience. And I often say that the bond is so deep precisely because we don't have language. We can't, discuss things endlessly. We have to go with what is here in this moment when we're interacting with animals.
Yeah, that's a really good point because it is so true. Like I have the female and the kitten are running around here right now and they're chasing each other and
Aw.
they're getting ready to fight and
Mhm.
they're just being lunatics like they do. And yeah, but yes, they don't care one way or another if you can yell at them or say whatever you want to them, and it doesn't matter. The tone is really everything with them.
Yeah. And she's teaching him how to be a cat, and how to be a cat around humans. I think
Right.
one of the other reasons it's so difficult to accept the loss of a pet is because when a human dies, we have culturally sanctioned rituals. We have memorials, wakes, people bring casseroles sometimes. There are, friends call and say, how are you doing? There are a lot of cultural ways in which human grief is supported. And our culture, until very recently, I would say there's still a significant part of the culture that denies the human animal bond, but they just don't know, right? has been very disenfranchised. It's, I've heard people say that their manager at work said, well, just go get another one, as though they had lost like a furry vase or something.
Oh,
And
goodness.
that's just so brutal and painful, and it can complicate grief. And so I think that's another thing is, nobody else knows our bond with our particular animal. And even in a family, let's say of 4 people, each individual has a different relationship with that animal. So there isn't, I was very lucky when Hedda died. I had a number of people who were texting me to make sure I was okay. But that, I think, is rare. And so people often feel isolated in grief. And that's part of why I wrote P.S. I Love You More Than Tuna, is so that people can feel seen the way their animal made them feel seen.
Right. Speaking of that, would you mind sharing your story about Hedda and telling us how the book, P.S. I Love You More Than Tuna, actually came about?
Oh, I'd love to. To me, it's such a beautiful story, which sounds really weird because it's about a really painful moment. But Hedda died on December 7th, 2016. And a few days later, a friend of mine's husband, who was a professional artist, sent me a sketch of Hedda. And it's just an adorable little sketch. And he wrote a note that went with it. And the note said, Dear Sarah, Hedda is telling you our love is making you strong to go forward. He was French, so his syntax was a little different. He said, that's what love is for, right? And then he wrote, P.S. from Hedda, I love you more than tuna. And I started bawling. But in the midst of this bawling, I started going, that's a book title. And, I didn't know him all that well at the time because I knew him through my friend. But he and I had talked about maybe collaborating. And when I saw that sketch, I immediately had a vision that was an assignment, which was to write an illustrated gift book, very simply like his drawings, and make it a gift book to be given to people who are grieving a loss of a companion animal. And it was very clear at the time, this was 2016, I thought, okay, I can see it on the front tables at Barnes and Noble, and all these like gifty promotion things. And of course, then the pandemic happened and none of the promotional tables did. But yeah, it was a very strong assignment, really. And so I'm just very happy that it's out in the world doing the work that it came to do.
And I understand that. I had a similar experience with the creation of a book, and it was just something that needed to be put out there. So obviously, like I already said, we do have typically a much shorter time with an animal than we do with humans. So be it 2 years or 20, how can we make the most of the years that we do have with our pets?
Good question. I love this because this really is the key to me, is going into the depth of the relationship, precisely because we can't extend their lives. And one part of kind of the collective human psychology is that we value what's scarce. And with animals, what's scarce is the time we have together. And in order to make the most of each moment, I have a video on YouTube called How to Deepen Your Bond with Your Pet. And so the first step of that is learning to look at them without labels or concepts. Imagine that this is a being that you've never before seen, and you've never seen anything like them, because all of us are expressions of nature. And animals come here they incarnate for their own reasons. And what I found when I did that with Hedda was just kind of this brief moment of, oh wow, this being is not my stories about her. And in doing so, I was able to really honor who she was and what she was here for. And I would like to think that was helpful to her. I don't know. I can never know. And really, with different species, they each have different needs. So for cats, creating an environment that is highly catified with climbing spaces or toys or whatever. And they don't have to be expensive things, just, I was going to say put a ladder up, but that's a really bad idea. I was trying to think of an inexpensive way to get height. I forgot what I was saying. I lost my place. Could you remind me?
Yeah, just about to catifying the space.
Yes. And paying attention to what each being needs. Each animal has different needs, even if they're the same species. For example, some cats like hunting bugs and others prefer catching birds or looking at birds. Dogs, ferrets, rabbits all have environments that can make them feel most at home. I mean, we are putting them in artificial environments, and largely because we've created a culture where it's not safe for them to live outside. I do think we have the responsibility of making it as much as satisfying for them as we can. I also think just knowing, accepting impermanence has been huge for me. We are all expressions of nature, and everything in nature that is born eventually dies. And that's the form, that's just the nature of form. But our love doesn't die because love is an energy, and energy doesn't die.
Right. So back to the book real quick. Why did you create it to be given as a gift rather than something that somebody would buy for themselves?
I wanted people to feel seen. Well, there are two sides of this. There's the giving aspect and the receiving. So on the side of the recipient, the person who is grieving an animal, as I mentioned earlier, people often can feel isolated or misunderstood because they're feeling these big, big feelings for a little tiny animal. And this is a way for a friend to say, I know you're hurting. I know that being meant a lot to you, and I see you. So I intend the book to be a form of witnessing for people. And at the same time, when our friends lose pets, sometimes we don't know what to say because we weren't privy to all of that bond. I mean, we might have gone on walks with someone and their dog, but we don't know that bond that well. And so the book is a way to show up for people and to offer tangible support, which is, when a human dies, I mentioned, we have wakes or people rotate bringing dinners, and nobody does that when a pet dies. So I wanted this to be the first kind of ritual of grieving a pet, is give this book to someone or have them receive it.
Okay. What are some other tangible actions that friends and family can take when a loved one is grieving a pet? Because it is such a difficult time, whether they understand it or not.
Yes, that is really important. Of all the people who have been grieving, there are two actions that people mention the most as being really, really comforting for them. The first is when people reflect back to the person who is grieving how much that person meant to the animal, and really reassuring them that they did well by this animal, that this animal loved them, and that they done good. The other is to make a donation, if you can, to a local rescue in the animal's name. And I have to say that didn't come up for me initially, and several people mentioned that. So that's always at the top of my list. Two other ways are more kind of behavioral. One is just listening and allowing them to have their grief and not offering advice unless it's requested. And goes kind of hand in glove, is not to judge how someone is or isn't expressing their grief. All of us grieve differently, and some people may be sobbing and unable to function, and others, it's much further below the surface, but they're still processing it. They're just not overt about it. What has been helpful for you when you've lost pets?
Well,
If you don't mind me
really,
asking a question.
no, I don't mind at all. And honestly, the main thing was, well, like you said, the acknowledgement that I did provide a good life for the animal, but also just the recognition that I think maybe that they understood or could at least empathize with what I was feeling.
Yes.
Because you can tell who's an animal person and who's not. And
Yes.
somebody that I knew from school recently posted a video about his dog. And apparently the dog is like chewing things up around the house or whatever. And he asked a question, when is enough enough? Like, when do you say enough is enough? This dog is tearing up my house and blah, blah, blah. And I said, never.
Yeah.
You never do that. You never say, okay, enough is enough, and you take the dog and get rid of it. No. You train it.
Yeah.
You take the time and so, I mean, you can just tell by that type of.
Yes. Yeah. That would
Yeah.
have upset me too.
Yeah. And I noticed that nobody responded to my comment either. So, I figured, well,
yeah.
so they must be a lot of non-animal people in that group. And that's okay.
Huh.
For me, if you would ever get to that point, and I know, because I did actually, I did get to that point, and it was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my entire life. But I had a black lab who was food aggressive, and he was always, almost daily, attacking my elderly Irish setter.
Oh.
But then he started growling when my son would come around me, and my son was just a baby.
Yeah.
And I lacked the capacity to do anything to train him to behave differently. Right. And we tried to rehome him unsuccessfully. And so one day he attacked the dog, and I said to my husband at the time, I just can't do this. I can't deal with this anymore. We have to do something. So he took him to the shelter. And this was a Friday. And the whole weekend I was just sick to my stomach. I called there first thing in the morning on Monday. They had already put him down.
Oh no.
Yep.
Oh
yeah.
God.
And so that's something that I have really struggled with. I mean, it's something that's very difficult to forgive yourself for when the choice of my child over my dog.
Yeah. I mean,
that's
that's a
like,
really impossible situation.
yes, it really was. And it's, he's 16 now, so it's been a long time, but it's something that I still have a hard time with that. And because there is that connection, and I had taken him in as a puppy. I literally got him to be a companion for my other dog because I was having a baby, and I thought it would be, it would be good so that he has somebody to be with him. And oh my God, did it backfire? So,
man.
But it really makes you think. You have to be certain when you take on the responsibility of an animal that you're going to have the time and the energy and whatever to give that animal what he or she needs.
Yeah. I mean, it's with dogs, 10 to 15, maybe 18-year commitment. I
Sure.
just want to interject a little compassion for you, though, and for anyone who finds themselves in a situation where really the only choice is surrender. Because we don't always, I don't know what's going to happen 20 years from now. And sometimes we can adopt with the absolute best intentions and something doesn't work out, just like, getting married and getting divorced. And I don't think it's something that can be done lightly. And again, like you, it's I've had to surrender a cat once and it gutted me. I think it gutted me even more than Hedda's death. And I felt so horribly guilty, but I had explored all my options. Nobody would take her. And my cat was attacking her. Hedda was attacking her. So yeah, Hedda turned into this tiny little black cat turned into a fierce bully when it came to any other cats near me. And like you, I had done it because I had taken a job, that wasn't working from home. And I thought, oh, she needs company. Well, it turns out she didn't. I very much am of the school of you are adopting this pet for its entire lifespan. And at the same time, I know that sometimes life throws us curveballs,
Right.
a child who's deathly allergic or something. So I just wanted to acknowledge that for people who might be in that situation.
Thank you for that, because I do appreciate it myself. I have a lot more questions that I want to throw at you, but if you don't mind, I want to just take a quick break and pay some bills, and then we'll come back in a moment.
Perhaps you've thought about starting your own podcast. I can tell you firsthand that starting a podcast was one of the best decisions I have ever made, but it can feel overwhelming if you don't know how to get started. Well, that's where Buzzsprout comes in. Buzzsprout is hands down the easiest and best way to launch a professional podcast. In fact, it's so good, they've already helped over 100,000 people launch their own podcasts. Buzzsprout will get your podcast into every major podcasting platform like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and more. You also get a great-looking podcast website, audio players you can drop into other websites, detailed analytics to see how people are listening, tools to promote your episodes, and on and on. Plus, Buzzsprout publishes new blog posts, podcast episodes, and YouTube videos every week, so you can learn the ins and outs of podcasting from the people who eat, drink, and breathe it. To start your own podcast and get a $20 Amazon gift card, follow the link in the show notes. This lets Buzzsprout know that we sent you and helps support our show. Buzzsprout, the easiest way to start a podcast.
Welcome back, everybody. So, Sarah, when we know that the end is near, but the pet is still alive, what steps can people take to make that eventual passing easier?
It's so hard. I think one of the most painful phrases that animal lovers ever have to hear is, it's time to prepare yourself. And even just saying that gives me goosebumps and brings tears to my eyes. And yet, when we hear that, in that moment, the animal we love is still with us. So it becomes a time to be very, very present. Hedda had many, many medical problems. And the first time I was told to prepare myself was 8 years before she actually died. So I started my process of anticipatory grief in like 2008, and she lived until 2016. But every time I read about someone losing a pet, I would just sob. And, I could not stop crying. And yet, at the same time, I'm able to go, okay, she's still here. I think all those years of knowing that the end was coming, before I learned kind of what impermanence is, knowing that this animal is not going to live forever. Again, that time scarcity. So it's time to go deep. When we were in the final week, a woman who works with my vet said to me, take time to let your emotions catch up to your decision. And what she meant by that was, as long as Head is not in acute distress and she wasn't, her pain was controlled, you don't need to rush euthanasia. Take the time to say goodbye. And also, even before that, let's say you get a scary diagnosis like I did when Hedda was 12. She was diagnosed with feline diabetes. And at the time, so I gave her insulin shots twice a day. At the time, I wasn't even aware of what mindfulness was. Today, I tell people, bring awareness into treatment time. If you're giving him subcutaneous fluids, talk to him about it. I don't believe that animals understand language, but they understand the energy in our hearts somehow. And just say, this will make you feel better. I'm doing this, because I love you and I want you to feel better. Same thing if you have to give them pills. By taking that time, whether it's a week or 8 years, I mean, if you have 8 years, you have more time. But even if it's a week, taking the time to say goodbye, acknowledging the bond and what this being has been for you, when you do that in advance, often we think, oh, this shouldn't be happening, this shouldn't be happening. We go into a panic. And that's resistance. And, as we know from other parts of our lives, resistance doesn't do anything. And so if we can accept, not necessarily be okay with it, but simply accept that the loss is happening, is going to happen, that goes so far towards healing. There's a psychologist named William Worden, Worden, and he has written kind of the 4 tasks of mourning, which are a different paradigm than Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief. And the first task of mourning is to accept that the loss happened. That's it. And that's big. It can take years just to get there. But if somehow you're able to accept that before the actual death, in my experience, that made the aftermath of loss much easier. Like, not easier, but I was able to function more quickly than I think I would have been able to had I not been able to take that time. That said, there are, I really wanted to write 3 versions of this book. 1 for animals that were adopted as adults, 2 for animals whose lives were cut short, and then the 3rd is the book that exists, which is for one with a full lifespan. Because sometimes we don't have that option. But if there's any chance at all, talk to your vet and ask if you can hold off for a day. And then, just set aside that time and really do whatever you need to do, to take care of yourself and to take care of the animal and thank them.
I believe closure too is so important. You recommend creating a ritual to say goodbye. Can you walk us through what that might look like?
Sure. I kind of winged it. The idea of a ritual just kind of came to me, but I blocked off the last 24 hours. So no obligations, nothing else. And I talked to her about all our adventures together. I mean, when I adopted her, we lived in Toronto, and then we moved to Vancouver, and then Vancouver Island. I thanked her for being there when I had my breakdowns and for effectively functioning as my mother, and how she took care of me. And then in the last couple of hours, I had borrowed money so that she could be euthanized at home, because that was very important to me. And So for the last few hours before the vet arrived, I played music and I lit a candle. I played a song by a singer, a wonderful singer-songwriter named Chris Williamson, called Lullaby. And I had sung it to Hedda when she was a kitten and she loved it. So I just had that on repeat. And it is actually a transition song, which made it even more powerful. Well, it's either a lullaby and or transition. And I skipped one part, which was a few days before I realized that my energy was really enmeshed with hers. After 20 years, of course it was.
Sure.
So I spent several hours just kind of visualizing our energy separating and allowing her to go freely without taking part of me with her, or her leaving part of her with me, enmeshed in my energy. I wanted her to be able to transition wholly and also leave me to be whole.
Nice.
But it's really whatever matters to you. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that's fine. I was just going to say, I think that's a really beautiful way to go about it, because you're supporting both of you in that process.
Mm.
So the premise of this podcast, I mean, especially with a name like Wake the Fuck Up, it's literally about, it's anything having to do with connection. Like, I want people to wake up to the fact that everything is connected. We're not just connected to ourselves, the spiritual part with the physical part, but we're connected to each other. We're connected to the earth and all the plants and every bit of the flora and fauna and these beautiful animals that we share our lives with. And so many people, as we talked about earlier, just don't quite get it. You know, they're more concerned about their couch than they are this beautiful sentient being.
Yeah.
And I ask this of everybody, but based on your experiences and your current areas of expertise, what one thing would you recommend to someone to help them wake the fuck up, to help them actually recognize that the dog is more important than the friggin' couch?
Yeah. I think the one practice that helped me the most, and I go back to it frequently, it's an Eckhart Tolle practice that he teaches of looking without labeling. And so many people are so identified with their thoughts that they might not even be aware that they're putting labels on an animal or concepts. But you know, if you're I don't know, I think if people are listening to a podcast called Wake the Fuck Up, then they probably do have that capacity. And we all have that capacity. It's just a matter of whether we recognize it or not. So looking at any animal, but especially one you care about, and taking away, just trying to make your mind as quiet as possible. And for me, the way I can quiet my mind is to focus on physical sensations in the moment. So focusing on the breath, but also like rubbing my hands together and feeling the electricity in my hands vibrate. That helps me kind of quiet my mind. And then, you know, something is looking at this being and recognizes it as part of itself. That's a very awkward sentence, but I think you get it.
I do.
You know, seeing the energy, I like to talk about it as, you know, we're two parts. We're the individual bodies, but then there's also an energy field that flows through all living things, plants, trees, humans. And so if we can observe from that energy field rather than from the ego or the thinking mind, then we can connect with the animal's awareness too. Or at least that's what it felt like to me. You know, we live in a world where the intellect is so vaunted. And the thing is, the human intellect is limited to what it's capable of processing. And
Right.
that's a very small amount. So going beyond that. And again, there's a video on YouTube of how to deepen your bond with your pet. And I think I'm more articulate on that one. Plus, it's like a full hour of how to do it.
Well, that's amazing that you have that out there, and it's, I'm sure, something that would be very helpful for anybody that would need it. This has been such a wonderful conversation, and I do think that it is not something that is typically talked about. And so I really just want to say thank you for taking your time today to come on the show and join me to have a conversation like this.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I mean, I love talking about this stuff, and there is a lot of like energy and waking the fuck up inherent in PS I love you more than tuna. And I don't always get to talk about that aspect of it. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. Now, I will have this information up in the show notes, but for anybody who'd like to find out more about what you're doing, how would they go about getting in touch with you?
Well, the tuna website is morethantuna.com. And my personal website, which is for nonfiction editing, is sarahchauncey.com. And then I have a blog called Living the Mess, which is, as you mentioned in the intro, those are the writings I've been doing on mindfulness and spirituality and mental health recovery.
Okay. And that's definitely something, if you're open to, because I know that you said that you were kind of taking a break from talking about that right now, but when you are looking to get back into opening up, being available for a conversation about that, living the mess, I would love to have you on and talk about that.
I would totally love to do that. And the only reason I'm not doing it is partly because I'm still promoting tuna, and partly because I'm still figuring out how to talk about all this, like this stuff that I've experienced and don't really know how to put into words.
Yep.
So when I have words for it, I would love to come back and share them with you.
Awesome. Well, you just let me know when you're ready and we'll make it happen. So,
okay.
Is there anything you'd like to add before we wrap up, Sarah?
I think the thing I'd like to leave listeners with is going back to the idea that love doesn't die. There's a writer named Jamie Anderson who has a quote, "Grief is love with no place to go." And so many people resonate to that. In my experience, grief changes over time and it occupies a smaller space. And for me now, memories of the humans and animals that I've lost, tend to bring smiles and warmth rather than tears. But it's hard. And the only way through is to allow yourself to feel the depth of pain. Our brains, those intellects will try and like talk us out of feeling bad, or, we'll try and rationalize. And really, healing grief is somatic. It's in the body. It's not a brain thing. I mean, I've had brain fog when I'm in grief, but it's just, you can't think your way through grief.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100% on that. Well, again, Sarah, this has been so awesome. Thank you. Thank you for joining me. I do look forward to speaking with you again about living the mess. And I'd like to say thanks to everyone who tuned in today. As always, I'm grateful for your presence. And I'll see you all back here next Sunday with another episode as we continue to wake the fuck up.